see it is you've got two choices. You can either keep pretending like nothing bad's ever gonna happen to you, and then when it does, you're saying, uh-oh, or you can get ahead of what's coming so that when it does, not if, you're ready for it. And you're sitting pretty, sipping on Mai Tais next to the pool, working on that Caribbean suntan, because you got it covered. So folks, it's time for you to learn the truth about money. It's time for you to take back control of your money so that you are ready for what's about to happen. By doing that, you're setting yourself up for absolute success. No matter what comes your way, you're ready for it. And that's what I want for you, and I want to help you with that. So go to chrisnoggle.com and sign up for the Wealth Webinar. We do them every Wednesday at 1 p.m., and you need to be there because it's time.
For over 90 years, we've been crash testing our cars in the tireless pursuit of automotive safety. At Volvo, safety's been first since 1927. We've saved millions of lives with the invention of the three-point seatbelt in 1959. At Volvo, we've made driving safer for you and them. Visit safety.finleyvolvo.com to learn more.
So they say if you give a man a gun, he'll rob a bank. But if you give a man a bank, he'll rob everybody. But the good news for you is Private Money Club runs solely on peer-to-peer relationships, which means no banks allowed. So finally, there's a community for real estate entrepreneurs where it is truly a win-win solution. This community is a place where you can connect with other lenders and other borrowers, and the end result's massive growth for you. You get to build your real estate empire, and you get to do it solving other people's problems. So if that sounds like a place you want to be, well then join us. Go to privatemoneyclub.com/Kelly. And if you want $500 off, just add the code Kelly500 and I'll knock $500 off the premier membership. We'll see.
Welcome to the Kelly Cardenas podcast, where attitude is everything. On today's show, I had to call an audible. We were going to go live like we generally do, but the conversation was so natural, so amazing with this young man that I just hit record. We went, and it was mind-blowing. We were talking about his new book called A Touch of the Madness. And if you haven't checked out Touch of the Madness, it actually just came out last week. You have to grab this book. This is seriously a life-changing experience. Not only life-changing from the books, from the book and the concept, but also for me, meeting the man that is behind over 200 feature films, either the director or the producer or the head of the studio for 200 films, including Platoon, Dirty Dancing, Terminator 2, the Mortal Kombat series. I mean, the stories that he shared today about Arnold Schwarzenegger, about Jamie Lee Curtis, about Oliver Stone, unbelievable. Absolutely. I mean, I'm just floored about with Dirty Dancing, how the song wasn't going in the right way. And this is a song that for me was one of my parents' songs. And to be able to sit down and have an hour-and-a-half conversation with one of the most elite producers in all of Hollywood. He was here in the studio. I'm still gleaming like this just happened. And I am so excited and so honored. And I mean, buckle up, put your seatbelt on, because this episode will absolutely blow your mind. This Touch of Madness, guys, I'm going to show it again. You have to get the book. And when you hear this, this is not just a book, not a concept, but a way of life. And he embodies that. Larry Kasanoff embodies that. And is my honor, my pleasure to share with you not only one of the most elite producers and studio heads in all of Hollywood, but now he's Larry Kasanoff, my friend. Enjoy the episode. When did you come up with that?
That's for when I'll tell you, that's when I met Oliver Stone. That's after Platoon.
Okay. I'll
tell the story because that's how it all started. So after Platoon, I ran into Oliver in a bar in New York, and he bought me a drink, and he said, "You know, kid, I like you. You have a touch of the madness." And I went, "That's it." Yeah.
Because as I went through, because you talk about creating, asking,
playing,
and then playing.
Yeah.
And I mean, so simple, And when you said ask, the thing that freaked me out is a lot of times as a kid, you're taught not to, or maybe it was my family. I remember asking the neighbor for some milk because we didn't have any milk. And I asked for a cup of milk, and I went home and I put it in the cereal. And I ate the cereal. And my dad came home and saw the cereal in the sink. And he was like, "What'd you eat today?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I forgot about it. But he was a guy who didn't have the money, but he went and made me buy a gallon of milk and give it back to the woman. And he said, "You don't ever ask anybody for anything."
That's funny. My dad was like that too, in a way. Not about asking, but no. But I was a very loud kid, and my parents were very supportive of stuff like that. But I had this great professor in college. I mean, she was a character, and she was amazing. And I was like her independent researcher for years. I did economics and sociology. She was sociology, and she used to encourage. She taught me. She used to encourage me to call people. I mean, when I was in grad school, I had to do a thesis on Warner Brothers, and so I just called the CEO of Warner Brothers as a student, and I said, "Yeah," and I talked to him for like an hour. And he got the whole thing. In fact, I was so stupid. I got so into the company, I used my student loan to buy Warner stock. Thank goodness it was so fucking stupid to do that. Because if it tanked, I don't know what I would have done. But fortunately, it didn't. But no, I started doing it really early on.
Really?
Yeah.
So when you started doing, because you jumped into Vestron, I'm saying it right. So with Vestron, you were producing 80 movies a year.
Delivering, making. I had to deliver. That means make them, buy them, co-produce them, co-finance them. Buy finished films, 80 movies a year.
Holy.
It was something like, it was like 8, it was like 6 or 7 a month, yeah.
Can anything stand in the place of that type of experience?
No. Well, I shouldn't say that because, I mean, see, in our lifetime, there have been 3 content gold rushes. This is where all of a sudden something happened and they needed content.
Okay.
One was, you weren't born yet, and I was a little kid in the 70s. Cable television came in.
Got it.
Used to be 3 networks, and then there were 500. They didn't have anything, so content gold rush. And the second time was when I started was home video. There were no video stores. Now there are video stores. A video store can have like 8 or 10,000 titles. They had none. Gold rush. That's when I got. And then streaming. When streaming started, you have all these swim lanes, and they need stuff. Gold rush. They need stuff. What inevitably happens is once they get filled up, then the audience gets a little satiated and says, "Oh, wait a minute, this stuff is a lot of crap." And they kind of settle down. But before that, there's a gold rush. And so the streamers had this similar thing. I mean, they're sort of coming to the tail end of it, but they had a similar thing in the last few years. The difference is they were not entrepreneurial companies that would let a kid like me do something like that. You wouldn't get that job out of college anymore. They're too corporate. They wouldn't take the chance. And in those days, the other big difference from today and then is there's a huge political correctness the last several years. Okay. And that didn't happen. I mean, you know, my philosophy at Vestron, because we didn't have a lot of money to spend on movies, was to just push the boundaries. And my boss encouraged me to. And that wildness made the movies last. And some of these low-budget movies we made 30 years ago, these horror movies, I was astonished to see are still playing at midnight shows. I mean, I had no idea. But they were simply because we let the boundaries be pushed, and people don't do that. If you watch a lot of movies on streaming now, they're very, very, very tame. The romantic comedies aren't that romantic. The horror movies aren't that horrible. The raunchy comedies aren't that raunchy. We shouldn't offend anybody. We didn't have that problem. So the times have changed a little bit, but the pattern of a new technology is invented, whoosh, there's an opening, there's a gold rush, you know, a rush of content. That repeats all the time. And so what's happening now in streaming, where everyone's going, "Oh my God, that's not new." That happened in home video, and that happened in cable. All of a sudden, there was a song once that said 500 channels and nothing to watch, because it's the same thing. And then eventually you start going to the video store going, "Well, you know, it's just new." So everyone forgets. But what's going on in streaming now is not remotely unusual. It's exactly what happens all the time.
What about the risk? So you talked about that risk, and there was a part in the book where you talked about taking the risk on Platoon, and you actually had to bet your job.
Yeah.
Did you flinch on it? Did you blink?
Of course. I had to do a lot of soul searching because, you know, this was the best job in the world, and I wasn't sure that it would work or it was worth a bet. But then I thought, I didn't get into the movie business to play it safe. I got into the movie business to make great movies. And I just believed in my gut. It was absolutely time, and I believed that Oliver was the absolute right director for it. The producer of the movie was also a great guy named Arnold Schwarzenegger, and there were some executive producers I knew. It was just a great group, but I mostly just felt that Zeke guy's right. It was good. The other thing I felt was that most movies about war are always physical. This was really about emotional. I mean, the tagline was the first casualty of war is innocence. And I thought, that's such a smart approach. And for years after Platoon, we would get letters from vets saying, now I can show my family what it was like. So I just had an instinct that it was right. And I thought, this is my job. This is what I got to bet on. And mostly at Vestron, you know, we didn't get that chance. We were making, I mean, I love the movies you were making, but, you know, they were, you know, Blood Diner. And so we didn't, and then we started moving up in the world. And no, of course I flinched. But
Tell me the Blood Diamond, the tagline for this one, because I love that one.
First they greet you, then they eat you.
So you jump into that with Vestron.
Yeah.
You're going at it. Platoon happens, you have to make the bet. When you have to have a touch of, I mean, exactly what your book is, you know, you have to have a touch of the madness to believe that that stuff is going to hit. Were you on pins and needles while you're watching it happen, or were you just?
Well, so we were doing, I do 80 movies a year, so that was one of them. And so once we green the Platoon, go on to do other things, and you check in to make sure it's on budget and so forth. But they were great producers. I was the studio head. And then they showed me the movie at a film festival in Italy one morning. And I was so nervous because if it was bad, goodbye job. And I'm the only person to giggle their way through the first screening of Platoon. Not that it wasn't great, but it was so great. I was like, oh my God, I'm not getting fired. I can keep my job. I remember calling home and saying, it's great, it's great. It was so great. It won Best Picture that year. And a few months later, as I think I mentioned earlier, Oliver Stone, the director, I ran into in a bar in New York one night, and he bought me a drink, and he said, you know, kid, I like you. You have a touch of the madness. And I thought, is he calling me crazy? Am I crazy? And then I thought, well, my boss was crazy to let a 25-year-old kid run an 80-picture film slate. Oliver had some touch of the madness by insisting on making a Vietnam movie in a way that no one else ever had. And I had a touch of the madness by betting my job on it. And then I realized that this is what it is. This is what it takes. You have to have a touch of the madness to be creative, because the current of the river of life will pull you towards the middle. It'll pull everyone towards the middle. And if you want to be in the middle, that's okay, but you'll never be great being in the middle, because your audience or your customers want the new and the different. And to swim away from that current, you need creativity and you need innovation. And the best way to get it is to be a little mad, is to give into that crazy thought in the back of your mind that's too nuts. My wife won't like it, my husband won't like it, my kids won't like it, whatever. That's the one. Do it. And I started realizing in the last few years that people are more reticent to take that creative chance than I've ever seen before. And so I wrote the book purely to encourage people to be their most absolute creative selves, regardless of what they do. They don't have to be a filmmaker. They could be a product management company for, you know, construction sites. It doesn't matter. It's that creativity that I think is important to foster.
Food was a common thread, or maybe I saw it in the book a lot. And there was one where, Larry, I love you anyway, and I think that you're probably one of the coolest people I've ever met. But when you replaced the waiter, I believe it was in Italy.
Yeah.
This, for me, like I was reading, my wife's in the bed with me. I laughed out loud, and I wanted to email you right then and say, Larry, that is the solidifier. Can you tell the story of that?
So one of my first assignments at Vestron was to make a sequel to a movie called 10. 10 was a seminal movie in, I think, 1979 or 1981, before I had started, where a woman named Bo Derek emerged and became one of the most famous women on earth as an incredible sex symbol. It was a great movie. And her husband, who was much older than she was, for which they always got a lot of crap, even though they were madly in love and they had a great relationship, wound up directing and writing all their movies, and Bo would produce them and star in them. And so we wanted to make a sequel to this movie, 10, which is the movie that really launched Bo. And they had, you know, they were very insistent on doing things their way, so their terms, not money-wise, but creative-wise, were a little difficult. So my job was to get them to make a deal on 10. And they were very famous. I mean, they were the best-looking people you ever met. Even inside a room, it looked like the wind was blowing in their face and the sun was shining in their eyes, even when you're inside. It was hard to, you know, I was a kid from the Northeast, and I would talk to them, and the first few times I saw them, I would just stumble over my words because they were so kind of good looking. And so we arranged to meet during a film festival in Italy, and they were so famous, I rented an entire restaurant. It was a small restaurant, and they brought a lot of their advisors, and John Derek, Bo's husband, was a really great artist, but temperamental. And something happened, and he got in a fight with a waiter. I don't know what happened because they were talking in Italian. And the waiter just eventually takes off his apron, throws it on the ground, and says, blah, blah, I quit, and he storms out. And I was trying to impress them. And no waiter, we rented the whole restaurant. There was no other waiters. No waiter, no dinner, no sequel. So I ran out into the street in Rome looking for this guy, and he had gone down an alley, and some kid was there watching. And I said, where did he go? And it was too late. And I said to the kid, do you speak Italian? And he said, well, I'm an exchange student from England. I'm here, I speak a little. I said, want to be a waiter for John and Bo Derek? He said, what? And I just gave him all the cash I had, and I just took a shot because I thought, it's better than nothing. He could have been a serial killer. And I came in, and then I brought him in the kitchen to where the guy who owned and was the cook of the restaurant was, and I said, this is our waiter. And the guy goes, okay. And he did a great job.
The other one, when I said the food part of it, was the peas, getting hit with the peas.
Yeah.
And this, I was just watching Arnold Schwarzenegger's documentary.
Right, it's great.
And I was watching that and hearing the story about True Lies. But this peas part of it, which is it confirmed yet, or is it?
No, it's not confirmed.
Okay,
we don't know. That comes in play where I suggest that one of the ways to embrace the touch of the madness is to play, and to have fun. And we decided to do True Lies. We were all at the Hotel de Cap, which is like this gorgeous, casually elegant 1920s F. Scott Fitzgerald, Great Gatsby type hotel at this charity dinner. And we were just putting together the deal for True Lies. And we're at this dinner, and all of a sudden, pea comes flying over to our table. And then another pea. And this is a very, black tie charity dinner. I'm looking around like, who's doing this? And the director of True Lies, Jim Cameron, was at the table, and there were some other people at the table. And I look behind me, and there's Jamie Lee Curtis giggling. Now, I had done a movie with Jamie a few years earlier called Blue Steel, but we weren't pals. I mean, we just worked together. And I never knew if literally Jamie was the one who started the food fight. I could never prove it. She might not have, and she might have been laughing at a joke. I have no idea. And later, Jim said, we should look at Jamie for starring in the movie. Now, he might have thought that anyway. All of this might have had nothing to do with the piece. We can't prove it. But I always like to think and hope that Jamie realized this would be fun to be in that movie and started a food fight at the Hotel de Cap. So we would think of her. But I have no proof that that was true or not. I just think it was fun, and I hope that's what she did, because what a great way to use play in the touch of the madness. And it was just so fun. I always remembered it.
Well, we're almost doing it more Pulp Fiction-ish because I'm going to play, and then we talked a little bit about create, but I want to go to ask, because this was one that even before we started talking, I asked you about it, and it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And, you made it so fun. Like through the book, you made it so fun. And every aspect of it, I was looking at it, I was like, am I allowed to do that? And I remember thinking, as I'm reading it, my wife sitting next to me in the bed, I wanted to ask her, is it okay for me to do what Larry just told me to do through the book?
Why wouldn't it be okay? I'm curious. Why wouldn't it be okay?
It's a lot. I think a lot of times because of belief system, because of the conditioning side of it.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, this is one of the biggest. I mean, the coolest thing about the book too for me was it was literally a stroll down my life and my timeline. So with this ask, when you bring in Guns N' Roses into this ask part. I remember this. This was a part of skating rinks for me. This was a part of growing up and getting a girlfriend.
Great song.
You asked without having the permission from the studio at the time. Was it the studio or
so that you're referring to? So the way you embrace the touch of the madness is create, ask, play. Create your great idea. Ask anybody for anything to get it, and do it in a state of play. Yeah. So the ask is really important because, as you say, a lot of people simply don't do it. So the first thing I ask people like you, but you've thought of this now, and ask everybody who's listening today, if you could call one person in the world who's alive right now and ask them a question, who would you call and what would you ask? See, most people say what you just say. They say, let me think. And the only reason they don't know is because you don't think you can. Well, why can't you? You can't. And so from what you're referring to is when we did Terminator 2, we wanted to do a music video, which Arnold wasn't contractually obligated to do. But in those days, a hit music video would play on MTV for 15 times a day, and it was great promotion. So I asked Arnold if he would do it. And rather than saying, well, I'm not obligated, he didn't say that at all. He said, of course, if you get the best band in the world, because everything had to be great with him. It was a great lesson. And I said, sure, who do you think the best band is? And he called his brother-in-law, who's in the music business, and he said, Guns N' Roses. And I said, no problem. I didn't know Guns N' Roses. So, but long story short, there were probably hundreds of asks for that one thing. We did do a Guns N' Roses music video for Terminator 2. They did have a song in the movie. It went platinum. The video won I think it was a fan music video of the year, a contest on MTV, just because we kept asking, no matter how crazy it got, we just kept asking more and more and more. An almost simpler story is during the pandemic, we decided to do an animated movie called Bobbleheads. A characters whose heads bobble. And we wanted Cher to play Bobblehead Cher, Cher, the most iconic woman in the world. And everyone said, there's no way. She's never done an animated movie, you'll never get her. So we asked and got her. And she was great in the movie. And when it was done, People magazine said to Cher, you've never done an animated movie before. Why did you say yes to this one? And she said, I've never done an animated movie before because no one ever asked me before. I did. But the reason that's important is because if Cher, one of the most iconic women on earth, is sitting around and no one ever asked her to be in an animated movie, can you imagine who in your life you're thinking of calling, but you're not because you're saying, well, maybe, everyone must ask them. They're never going to do it. They get asked. Well, no one had ever asked Cher before, so you never know. So I really encourage people to ask anybody. And if it's a little daunting to call whoever's your Cher in your life, start smaller. Start with the guy, the local, place you eat, and ask him why they close so early. Call your brother-in-law you never really talked to. It doesn't matter. Get used to exercising that muscle. I started doing it in college. Get used to exercising that muscle if you can't ask anybody anything. And what's the worst that'll happen? They'll say no. I'm trying to get the Pope to do something. I've been trying for a while, the Pope. And they keep saying no, but we get these lovely pass letter from Vatican City, and we just keep trying. No is the beginning. It's just the beginning. I don't even hear the word no anymore. People say no to me all day long. I'm astonished. How could they say no to me? I'm kidding. But they do all the time. So what? Just keep asking.
I think one of the most important elements for me in that story was when you went in, you talked about it, you went into the meeting and everyone was saying no to the music video.
Oh, yeah.
And Slash walks in.
That was a lucky break.
Well, lucky break, and you're such a humble guy, but you had developed a relationship, and put some things in play with the band.
Well, we had gone to the band first to get buy-in of the band.
Yeah.
Right? I wouldn't say we had a relationship, but the band liked the idea.
And you had a great dinner with them.
And we had Arnold and his then wife were incredibly gracious and threw this wonderful dinner, and the band really liked the idea. When we were asking Guns N' Roses to do this, they were the biggest band in the world, and this was slated to become the biggest album in the year or of the decade called Use Your Illusion. And we wanted to change the whole marketing plan of the album for the movie. Now, being associated with Terminator 2 was also great for them, but the movie hadn't been made yet, so everyone was taking a little bit of a risk. And yes, and so the record company was screaming at me saying, you think you can get away with anything by asking, you think you can just ask us, you think we'll do whatever the movie guy wants. And then Slash did walk in and say, hey, the movie guy, let's do what he wants. And everyone said, great idea, Slash, of course. That's what it was like. But it was a great idea. There's none of these stories are about, we pulled the wool over someone's eyes. It worked out great for everybody. That's still an iconic music video. The song was perfect for the movie. The video helped the band. Everyone helped everyone. So I think the more you're asking for something that you truly believe in, I would not encourage you to sell something you wouldn't buy or to swindle somebody ever or anything like that. All the stories in here are things that I really believed in. And so the video and putting Guns N' Roses or getting Guns N' Roses to be in Terminator 2 was great for everybody. I think that's why. And if you have that kind of wind at your back, saying, yeah, but this is great. What I'm asking people to do is great. It's great for them. It's great for me. It's great for whatever project you're working on. It's much easier to ask.
You had the opposite situation with the person asking you in the book that you talked about a story, which a guy told you that he got abducted by aliens and that the aliens were going to come and take his kids if you didn't sign off on the script.
Yeah.
First of all, can you talk to me about that story?
Well,
But and the point in this is huge.
So anyway, you know, the book we haven't mentioned, it's called A Touch of the Madness, and one of the chapters is a touch of the madness versus a ton of the madness. So in each of these things, is it too much or not? Have I gone too far? Have they gone too far? And that's one of the questions. And so as my responsibilities grew at the first job I had at Vestron, and I started inheriting some other divisions, we had someone who now reported to me had started working on a movie about, you know, alien abductions, which is always sort of popular. And the script we didn't think it was very good. And the guy who wrote the book, and he also wrote the script, asked if he could see me, now that I was in charge of his movie too, alone, which I never usually did, but I just did it. And I went to see him, and he said, "I'm so glad you're here because they," and he kind of looked around and pointed up. He said, "They think it's very important that you're here." I said, "What?" He goes, "Yes." And he whispers close and goes, "They," points up again, really overly dramatic. "They told me that this is the way they want the story told, and if you make any changes, they," again points up for the third time, "will take my children." And I said, "Wait a minute. Are you telling me that if we don't make the script the way you want, the furry little space aliens will nab your kids?" He's like, "Yes, but keep your voice down." I'm thinking, and I shook his hand. I said, "Shake my hand." And I said, "Congratulations. That is the most outlandish reason I've ever had a writer tell me why he won't do the studio's notes." I mean, essentially, he's saying, "Screw you to the studio, but I'm going to do what I want because the aliens tell me." So, you know, the question was too much of the madness on his part or not. And in that case, I would call it as too much of the madness, because did I believe that the aliens have come to Earth using technology we can't fathom, and when they get here, they go, "Yeah, let's make sure Act 2 has a little more jokes for us." And no, I don't think the aliens cared about the script. So I think he so overplayed his hand that we never made the movie.
So let's go back to the create part, because when you're creating something, I think a lot of times people say, you know, you hear it all the time, work your passion or fall in love with your passion. But you changed my mind in that first chapter too, when you talked about create, because you instantly went to, well, what does the audience want?
Yeah.
You're not playing to your boss. You're not playing to yourself. You're playing to the audience.
We all work for the audience or for our customers. I always ask people, I always give a little talk before our movie saying, you don't work for me, you don't work for the director, and you don't work for the studio. You work for the audience. And never forget that you're just a custodian for the audience. And if you say I, you're going to screw up. So when we started Mortal Kombat, and you know, everyone told me I was crazy. There were no hit movies from video games in those days. But I decided to do it, and we had we were at the studio, we were doing pre-production, we had a bunch of character designs, and as a favor to someone, we had a group of kids from a local school, like 12 or 13-year-old kids, in to show them around. And they loved it, and we showed them designs of this Mortal Kombat character and that Mortal Kombat character, and there's a Mortal Kombat character named Kano, who kind of has a metal eye patch, which sort of looked a little bit like the Terminator looked at one part of Terminator 2. So I decided that because I had just worked on Terminator 2, I would switch Kano because it'd be a little boring, I thought, a little creatively uninteresting for me. So as I go to Kano, this kid says, but Kano has a metal eye patch, because I had changed Kano's design. And I said, yeah, but I just finished this movie called Terminator 2, and I think it's a little similar. And then he said, but Kano has an eye patch. And I said, yeah, but we got to change things. And the kid started to have a full-out panic attack. And then I realized that everything that was wrong with what I just said to you was wrong with my rationale, which is all I said to you was I would be a little bored. I think I should change it. I didn't think of what the audience wanted. When I looked at that kid who loves Kano, thinking, how could you dare change Kano? I realized the stupidity of my mistake. I took down the picture, I ripped off Kano, and for the last 25 years, Kano has a metal eye patch. We work for that kid. And that kid was, thank goodness he was there, because otherwise I would have made a huge mistake. So when you create your great idea, which is, you have to really understand the essence of your brand. What is people really like about whatever it is you're doing? We talked earlier today, we won't mention them, about some musicians more successful than others. What's the essence of their brand? So, but then it's the audience. And so the kid was really nice and told me. I mean, it wasn't nice. It was really a nice break that the kid told me. And as soon as we changed Kano back and told him we would, he calmed down. You know, when you are a custodian for your audience, whatever you do, not just as a movie producer. I mean, imagine you go to the same place to get your haircut and all of a sudden they change. Well, you're upset. This is not right. We all work for the audience.
What about the technology part? Because you touched on this too, as far as opposed to chasing all the technology and then trying to figure out how to maximize the technology. You said, no, how will the technology work and promote what it is that you're doing as far as your idea?
Well, I'm a big fan of technology and entertainment in my field. Okay. So, and I've been very fortunate in having, making the first movie for a video game and working on the first movie that extensively used morphing and making the first moving camera 3D shot and a bunch of other things.
The morphing was the liquid metal.
Yeah,
yes.
That's Terminator 2. And so I'm a big fan of it, but I'm a big fan of using it to tell your story, not the other way around. So we make theme park rides as well, and we decided at one point we wanted to make a theme park ride where you could move in 3D space through a Borg cube for Star Trek. If you're not familiar with Star Trek, the Borgs are the bad guys who float around space in these big evil cubes. And up until that point, 3D or stereoscopic 3D cameras never moved. They were always stationary. They didn't have any moving 3D cameras, but we thought we could invent one. So we went to Paramount, we pitched the idea, they loved it, they got it, we sold it, and then we had to figure out how to do it. And we teamed up with another company and invented a moving 3D camera, and it became the first ever 3D moving shot, which helped start the craze of, which happened several years ago, of 3D films and shows and things. And at that point, a network came to see us, and they said, we're going to start a new network, a studio, and it's going to be 3D, and can you make us some 3D content? We said, sure, what do you want? And they said, we don't know. And we said, well, who's your audience? And they said, we don't know. And we said, well, why are you doing it? And they said, well, because it's a cool new technology. They were gone in 6 months. So you have to let technology enable your idea. But your idea is king. You can't say, well, this is cool technology, I'm going to do something with it. You'll fail. Then you're just chasing the trend everyone is chasing. So using technology to implement your idea, fantastic. Grabbing the new technology because everyone else is, that's the metaverse. It'll fail. So
the locking onto the idea was another one that hit me because my parents' song was I Had the Time of My Life. And I might lose it a little bit here, Larry, but...
no, I can tell. I know what you were getting at.
But the reason why I was saying that I might lose it is because, both my parents, I lost my dad about almost 2 years ago, and then my mom about 5 years ago. And they were split up at one point. And my mom was living in Lompoc with us with the three boys, and my dad was living down here in San Diego. And my mom saved enough money to be able to rent a car. And we drove down, and she had a tape of I Had the Time of My Life. And we listened to it on the way there.
Great.
My parents came together. I'm getting goosebumps while I say it.
Goosebumps too. That's great.
But that song almost didn't happen.
Yeah. So when it's a good thing about what you have to do, because once you create your idea, and you know the essence of it, and you understand the audience you're making it for, you have to hold on with a zeal that in itself is almost madness. And so when we started Dirty Dancing, it was not a big deal movie. Another studio had already passed on it, and it wasn't going great. And the people who ran the company, my first company, managed to lure a music legend named Jimmy Einer, who was also a producing legend, to come oversee Dirty Dancing. And he in turn brought in another musical legend named Michael Lloyd. So now Jimmy and Michael are in charge of Dirty Dancing. As a studio head, you're like, oh, someone who's great. And so they're the geniuses behind the movie, not me, it's them. And so, and the song Time of My Life was originally done a little before them as a high falsetto disco song, sort of. And they didn't like that. They wanted to change it. So they made all these changes. They got Bill Medley from the Righteous Brothers as a favor, I think, to record a slower, lower, more ballad type song. And they then sent it to everybody, the managers, the record company, the director of the movie. Everyone hated it, thought it was terrible, wrote them notes saying, look, you got to change this, you got to change that, we don't like this. And Jimmy and Michael were so accommodating, and they said, sure, no problem, we'll do it, we want everyone to be happy. 3 weeks later, they sent out version 2, and with a note saying, Now, we sent this to some radio stations, and they seemed to like it. In those days, radio stations really helped you promote albums. And they got notes back from everybody saying, oh, thank goodness, and this is great. Thank you for making the changes. You're so accommodating. We really appreciate it. You've done what we wanted. Thanks so much. So the question is, what did they do between version 1 and version 2 musically that made everyone so happy? And the answer is, what they did was nothing. They didn't change a thing. They just changed the label, version 2. And in fact, they doubled down. They sent it to radio stations. So if the radio stations that hated it, they would have said something about it publicly and screwed up. So when everyone told Jimmy and Michael, this song sucks, change it, they didn't listen to anybody, but they told them they would because they just gambled that no one would know, especially since the radio stations like it. They doubled down, and that's the song you hear, which that year won Grammy for Best Song and the Academy Award for Best Song, because they knew what they had and they didn't change it. And that's what you got to do if you want to swim away from that current that will pull you to the middle. Yeah. And you want to make something great. You've got to hang on with a zeal that is fantastic and almost crazy. I get told all the time, still, that my ideas are crazy. It always happens.
Let's stay on that movie, Dirty Dancing, because the actress almost didn't happen too. And
well, no, she almost didn't happen because Jimmy was in charge, and so there was no way. But that was a good example of me not knowing the audience. So when Jimmy said he wanted to cast Jennifer Grey, I suggested, having been in the movie business for all like 30 seconds at that point, I said, she's a great actress, but she's such an every woman. Don't we want someone glamorous and really famous? And Jimmy said, you idiot, that's the whole point. She's an every woman. And because she's an every woman in the world will identify with her and think, if she can get a guy like Patrick Swayze, I can get a guy like Patrick Swayze. He said, if you cast some, vapid beauty queen, not that Jennifer isn't pretty or anything, but if you cast some vapid, model-looking beauty queen, everyone is going to say, well, sure, but I don't look like that. They believed in Jennifer. They identify with Jennifer. That was the audience. He knew that audience. I was like, oh. And that's another great example of knowing the audience. Jimmy, who is, full disclosure, is my business partner to this day. Jimmy knows audiences better than any person I've ever met in my entire life. He just understands and understands and understands. And even if I stray from that, who's your audience? Who's your audience? So that was a naive question because I didn't understand the audience. Jimmy understood the audience.
What about the going too far? I want to jump back to that because there's the touch of madness, there's the ton of madness. You referred to that, madness, right? Yeah. Ton of the madness. And a touch of the madness is unbelievable. You have your idea, you lock into it, you ask, and then you play. But there is the too far at times. How do you know if you've gone too far?
You have to be really, really, really honest with yourself, and this all is part of you have to do what you're true to. I would never encourage people to do something they don't want to do. I just got back in July. I went location scouting for a new movie in Petra in Jordan, which is this incredible, almost, you can't believe it exists place. But it's in the desert in southern Jordan. It was 95 degrees. We were climbing mountains, covered in flies. I was in heaven. I love doing that kind of stuff. I would never encourage someone else to do that if they don't want it. So the question is, if you and I went for a hike, you might be able to hike for 15 miles, no problem, but I might need to stop at 10. You have to know who you are. So that's the first thing. It's not the same limits for everybody. And the only way you really know is you've got to do what your instinct tells you to do. And if your instinct tells you not to do it, don't do it. Remember, when I told the PLATOON story, it was all my instinct. And if you're calm and present, your instinct will tell you what to do. So don't belie your instinct. And you'll still make a mistake sometimes, but no one bats 1,000. If you're a baseball player and you bat over 300, you're a superstar. But that still means you're striking out 7 out of 10 times. If you're a top fighter, like a boxer, like Floyd Mayweather, and you've won 50-0, you've never lost a match, you still get hit like 50 times in every fight, in every round that you win. So the notion that, well, you might go too far one point, you might not. Like the story about the waiter in Italy, I used to think, did I go too far? I mean, I just grabbed some kid off the street and introduced him to the most famous woman in the world at the time. Ooh, that could have backfired, but, it didn't. Did I go too far? Well, I looked and I thought I had no other shot. It was either that or out, so I took the shot. And you have to ask yourself that question, but don't do anything you don't want to do. Don't do anything you feel is wrong. If you feel it's wrong, it's probably wrong. If you feel it's right, but you're scared, do it. If you feel it's wrong, don't do it. And how do you know? Only you know.
You took a shot with a man, if I'm saying it correctly, Thay. Am I correct? Ty. So with Ty. So Thayy.
Right.
So Ty. You took a chance with him. And
Well,
'cause this one made me laugh out loud too.
well, so I believe that as you ask anybody anything, you have to be open that you might get an answer that is not the answer you expected, but it could be a wonderful answer. And so I read a book a long time ago by a Zen Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich Nhat Hanh, at that point, this was already probably 15 or 20 years ago, Thich Nhat Hanh was very well known as a peace activist. He was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King. He's written over 100 books, and he's known for bringing mindfulness, or the state of being in the present moment, to the West. And so what do I do with this peaceful, beautiful Buddhist monk when I read his book? I call him up to see if he wants to get involved in Mortal Kombat, which is not peaceful. But I thought, well, maybe he'd be great inspiration for the character of Raiden, if you know Mortal Kombat. And I said, sure. And I went to see Ty and some of his monks and nuns. And after 2 hours, I felt like I'd been on vacation for like 2 weeks. And I said, what's your secret? And Ty said, no secret, practice. And I said, practice? You mean I could learn to feel this calm? And I became friends with him and some of the monks and nuns. They came to my house. I introduced them to a bunch of movie people, so maybe people would start putting his message in movies. We became friends for years. I saw him all over the world. And then he asked me to do a documentary, not about him, but about his teachings. And I did it. It's called Mindfulness, Be Happy Now. It's on Amazon and Gaia. And it has Thai means teacher in Vietnamese. Everyone calls Thich Nhat Hanh Thai. And Sister D and Sister Chan Kong and Deepak Chopra and Sharon Stone and Oliver Stone, a bunch of great people in it. And we became just great friends. And I started practicing mindfulness. And in fact, they have a monastery. One of the monasteries is in Escondido, which is near where we are now. Yeah. And when we're done with this, I'm going to see some of the nuns to say hi and actually give them a copy of the book, because I've read so many of their books. And Ty passed away last year, but as he will say, a wave was something before it was a wave, and it will be something after it was a wave. It doesn't go away, it just changes. And he said, there is no birth, there is no death, there is no fear. And he said, shortly before he died, Ty said, if you think my teachings and me are going away, you don't know much about me. And it's really beautiful. But by the way, given your circumstance, if you're into such things, his book is called No Death, No Fear. And it's helped me a lot. Yeah. And I suggest reading it. And they're wonderful. And so here I go to meet this guy I don't know much about, thinking Mortal Kombat. He was not interested in Mortal Kombat. But they were great. And I made lifelong friends, and I became wonderful friends with all of them. And I've been practicing mindfulness ever since. And finally, the last time I saw Ty was a few years ago when I'd finished the documentary. He'd had a stroke, but he couldn't talk, but he could hear and things. And I went to find him. He was recuperating somewhere in a mountain in the middle of Thailand. It was like a movie where, the kid from America, not the kid, but the kid from America is taking the movie and trying to find him, because they're not terribly specific about where he was or if I could see him. But long story short, I did find where they were, and I did get to show him part of the documentary while he squeezed my hand, and then that was the last time I saw him. And then I went back to my hotel in Bangkok. They were like 6 hours away, took a shower, and then I went out to clubs in Bangkok all night. And when I tell that story to some people, they say, wait a minute, but how could you do the two things in one day? And I think, who would have loved that? Ty. Because I did them mindfully. When I was with him, I was nothing but being with him. But then when I wasn't with him now, Bangkok is great nightlife, and why shouldn't I go enjoy it? It was wonderfully mindful, and I felt great. So it had an effect on me, but not what I would have thought. It wasn't Mortal Kombat, but it had a much more profound effect. So you always have to be open that you might get a different answer than you want, but it might be a better one.
The creative side of you and the adaptability is phenomenal, because you had an opportunity with Thriller, right? So with Thriller, that situation at the time, and most people don't, and as I was reading about it, and to sell a 13-minute video on a video cassette and someone buy it, that wasn't the market at the time.
Right.
But that didn't stop you.
Well, to be clear, it wasn't really me. I mean, so that was when I just started with the company. Thriller was just breaking, it was huge, and we wanted to figure out how to put it on home video, but it wasn't, no one would buy a 13-minute home video. And the guy who started our company had worked at HBO, so we had a good relationship with HBO. So we partnered with HBO to make the making of Michael Jackson's Thriller, which was a documentary, which was a really good documentary, but it included Thriller. So it was a way for us to sell Thriller, but in so doing, sell an hour something tape, which became the first million-selling home video ever. Now, I didn't think that up. I was fortunate that I got to work on it, I got to contribute to it, but the guys who ran the company thought that up. But it was a good way to start my career, because it was thinking, this is how you think. And again, it wasn't any kind of a pulling the wool over anyone's eyes. The making of Michael Jackson's Thriller was great. It came about because we were trying to think, how do we get Thriller in people's hands at home? But it was great. I mean, if it wasn't great, you know, it'd be a different story. So the idea was, how do we help the audience, but also sell something that really, really works? And everyone won. No one ever complained that, gee, I didn't get my money's worth from Thriller. So we partnered with HBO to do it.
So you're familiar with the parable about dropping the same seed on three different types of soil. So rocky ground, a shallow ground, and then the right soil, right? And when I say that, the reason why I say it is because when you got to 25 and you go to Vestron, and then you go 80 movies a year, you're doing that, you understand a touch of the madness. It clicks. What soil was put in play from an early age that seed was able to take root? Because,
you know, I had wonderfully supportive, just really good, down-to-earth parents. They were wonderful people. They didn't have any money or any connections or anything like that. They were just salt-of-the-earth people. Their funeral, their best friend said, 2 finer people you'll never meet, which I think was true. And they were just very, very encouraging of whatever my brother and I wanted to do. When I was a little kid, my dad took me to a James Bond movie, and I left the movie saying, okay, I want to be James Bond, but who's that guy it says produced by? Like, what does that guy do? And my dad explained it to me, and that was it. From then on, I wanted to be a producer. And I just knew it, and I still wake up every day loving it, and I just always knew, and I just started calculating from the age of, like, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9, how the hell can I get to Hollywood?
So you talked about something too, which there was quite a few concepts in the book that shook me. And one of which was, don't listen.
Yeah.
And I was like, hello, Larry. Like, I was laughing because of the peas. I'm going to start asking everyone. And I tried it that next night. I was sitting with my son, and I was thinking, Larry told me to ask. So I had been going after someone on the podcast for 5 months, and I had just been sending them videos. And my son was sitting next to me, and I just said, Maddox, I started the podcast because of you and your sister, so you wouldn't worship idols, but you would be inspired by icons. Let's make this video real quick. We sent him a video, and I said, hey, so-and-so, I would like for you to be on the podcast, and my son here would like you to be on the podcast because he would think I was cool. You think that's right, Max? He said, yes. He asked him. We got a call back in 5 minutes, and the guy was on.
That's great.
So, but when I was going through all this, I'm like, yes, Larry, yes, Larry. I got to that point, and you said, don't listen. And I was like, Larry, help me with this.
People tell everyone to listen to your elders, listen to this, listen to that. Sometimes you have to realize that the most important words in the universe you're ever going to hear are the words you tell yourself. So listen to those words first, because other people might be wrong. We always say no matter what we do, well, why did someone pass on this? It very rarely occurs to us, maybe they're just wrong. I mean, if they were right all the time, they probably would have a different job than they have. So yeah, I do think we tend to listen too much to authority. We tend to listen to the voice in our head that says you can't. We tend to not listen to those words, that I said are the most important ones in the universe, which is, this is what I really want, and this is what I can do. Those are the words to listen to. Otherwise, I think I'm not saying when you're in school and your teacher says, here's how you do math, you shouldn't listen, because that's a fact. But when people tell you can't do something you believe in, don't listen.
5 psychopaths at the pool.
So psychopaths at the pool. It wasn't 5.
Okay. So there was multiple. There was more than 5.
So that's, again, a question about, too much, too little. And in my first Cannes Film Festival, since I was a little kid, I always wanted to go to the Cannes Film Festival. And now I'm head of production. I have this suite. I'm at this fantastic hotel called the Majestic. I can't believe I'm there. I'm just so grateful. I'm so flabbergasted. And I come downstairs, and John and Bo Derek and this producer named Julia Phillips, who was a genius producer in her day, first woman to win Academy Award for Best Picture, but not easy to deal with, and some others, all of whom we were making movies with, and all of whom we, one way or another, were meeting with, or I don't think we brought John and Bo to Cannes, but we brought Julia to Cannes and another actress who kept talking about how many times she tried to commit suicide, which is serious, but not really poolside chatter when you're first meeting. And they're all there, and I'm thinking, these guys, they're psychos. I mean, all of a sudden, I'm like, where? But then I realized, when you realize the movies they had collectively been involved in were great movies. And I thought, well, what I've got here is a bunch of psychos at the pool, because I was sitting around the pool in the Majestic overlooking the Mediterranean. And I said, but they're my psychos. There are psychos. Look at the movies they made. So the fact that they're a little psychopathic and are charging $50 drinks to my hotel room, so what? And so I realized that's not going too far, because they have a touch, or more than a touch, of the madness, but out of them collectively came some of the greatest movies. I mean, they were involved in some of the greatest movies of the decade. So they're my psychos. And so embrace them, because I think you should embrace the madness.
What about when you've talked about the fact that if it's not working, then 12 times it, or do way more than you're doing right now.
Go bigger.
Yeah, go bigger. Like, this was a concept too, where most people would say, like, if it's not working, let me just peel back on it. I'll just do it in a bite size.
Yes, there's a tendency that say, well, if I ask for something I don't get it, go smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And I see people now, because again, I think people are a little nervous to really go for it. People start negotiating against themselves before they even got an answer. I see it with some of my own partners in projects. I'm like, what are you doing? What do you mean we should offer something? They haven't even answered us. And so I think often when you get that instinct to go smaller, go bigger. So one time when I started making animated movies, I tried to sell one, and I was having trouble. And I thought, okay, if I can't sell one, maybe I can sell a package of 12. And that's what I did. And it worked. And so sometimes, why does it work? I'm honestly not sure. Sometimes I think it's just because the confidence you exude when you do that is picked up on by people. Sometimes it's because there are more fees involved if everyone is working on a bigger project than a lesser project. But sometimes it's just a better idea. You know, it's just a bigger, better idea. And if you're going smaller out of fear, remember, you have to try and do the opposite of what the fear tells you. If you're going smaller because of fear, then people will know that, and it'll smell that way. If you're going bigger because of a great opportunity and a great idea, why not?
Where can a person start to get a touch of the madness? Like, if they're, when you asked me earlier, you said, when I heard ask, I shrunk back a little bit, and I told you why, because of the lens or people around me or things that I had heard or listened to, and it was my fault. With that kind of thing that happens with a lot of people, where can they start to tap into that touch of the madness right now?
I suggest the first thing they do to get used to it is ask. And ask small. Don't ask something that you consider a big ask. Start small, like I said. Call your local store and ask a question. Call whoever. Call someone at the local university. Because it's a muscle. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. And the more you start realizing the possibility of all the people who are out there and who are open to you. And just try. Just I would challenge your listeners to, yes, ask the question, answer the question, who, if you could call anybody, who would you call? And what would you ask them? Okay, think of that as your kind of maybe touchstone. But who else do you want to call? Who's maybe a little closer, a little easier? And as I said, maybe it's a relative you don't know. Maybe it's who knows? And just ask them. It's easier. It's a little harder if you call, because you have to talk to them. But if that's too much, you can email them or DM them or whatever. But just start. Try. What do you get to lose? And the more you do it, and then eventually someone will answer, you go, well, that wasn't so bad. But more than that, you're going to find, what if they don't answer you? So what? The sky won't fall in. You'll be fine. Try. And that's a great way to start. So I think asking is the gateway to, if you don't feel you have a touch of the madness and you want it, I think asking is the gateway.
You connected two things that I never connected before. You said play and innovation.
Yeah.
And connecting the two. That was a concept for me that again, I think about it with kids. I coach kids 5th and 6th grade flag football. When they're having fun, they play at a different level.
Yeah.
But I never connected it.
Play is another way to get into the madness too, because let's say you work as a marketing manager for a design studio. When was the last time you said to your staff, you know what, it's Thursday at 3 o'clock, let's all go out for frozen yogurt? I mean, it's just fun. I mean, so what? Or whatever you want to do. What is something you want to do at work that's fun? Something that you think is play. The way you analyze things in a state of play is different than the way you analyze things in a state of fear or worry or whatever. You're more creative and you are more innovative. And when I started at Vestron, the company had already greenlit its first movie, which was kind of an ultra low budget, what we would call today Game of Thrones. There was no Game of Thrones then, but it's the kind of movie. And it was going to be made in Italy, and a back lot at a studio in Rome. And my boss had said to me and my staff, okay, I want violence, I want sword fights, I want sex, I want magic, I want everything. And as a joke, he said, and I want snakes and wizards. It was funny. and so as we were developing the script, and we were the studio, the producer was already in Italy, and we would finish every conference call with him by saying, and remember, snakes and wizards. It was our cry. And so I get to the set. Finally, it's my first set. It was lovely. It was Italy. It was kind of relaxed. The producer was an old hand at this. A little wine at lunch everyone was having. And they start telling me they have a surprise. And then the day of the surprise comes, and they tell me this is just for you. And everyone's very anxious and very excited. And we're standing out back right after lunch, and I see in the hills of Rome nothing. Then a little dot. And the dot gets a little bigger and bigger. And I see it's dust. And I saw there's a truck. And as the truck comes closer and closer, it's very colorfully decorated. It backs up. They're all surrounding me in a semicircle. A band is playing. I don't know where they got a band. And the back of the truck opens, and out pops all these women with snakes around their neck. Burmese pythons, boa constrictors, and everyone is dressed as beautiful wizards, women and men. And they're like, we got you your snakes and wizards. And I realized we never told them we were joking. Snakes and wizards was just our joke. It was like our battle cry. There weren't no snakes and wizards in the movie, but clearly they had gone to enormous trouble to find somehow all these snakes and dress all these people up as wizards all over Italy. And what do I do? I mean, what do I do? And so in a state of not play, you could easily get mad at them. You could see, where did you see this in the script? You should have asked us if we're going to go over budget. In a state of play, plus, honestly, it's a little hard to say no to a 12-foot Burmese python when you're staring him in the face. In a state of play, you say, here's what we're going to do. And so I did what you should do in a state of play as the producer of your first movie. Put them all in the movie, I said. And we and then we did. There was no place for them. Somehow we threw them in the movie, and they looked great. And honestly, the movie's terrible. But it made a fortune, and I like to think the Snakes and Wizards helped. But even if they didn't, not putting in the movie would have disappointed that crew like crazy, because they went to such hard work. And it was really our mistake, because it was so outlandish a thing, Snakes and Wizards, when there was no Snakes and Wizards in the movie. It's like as if I called you before this podcast and said, and I can't wait for the zebra, and I can't wait for the zebra, and you brought a zebra. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And that's what they did. And you know what? We had a blast. And the movie made a fortune. As I said, it's really not a good movie, but it did make a fortune. And I'm so glad the Snakes and Wizards were in the movie.
Paul Newman's Blue Eyes.
Well, so I'm a huge believer in what I call true diversity. And I think true diversity is much more than the color of someone's skin. It's where they're from, it's their age, it's their cultural background, it's their socioeconomic background, it's their educational background. And we use, for our digital work, meaning visual effects or animated movies, we use a network of animators all over the world. And as soon as you do that, you just have diverse people anyway, because you're using people all over the world, and you're not hiring them because someone told you to. They're great. And in one of these people, when we were starting, we were talking about a character, and I said, we want this, and we want Paul Newman eyes. Now, if you don't know, Paul Newman was a very famous movie star in the 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe even 80s, and known for his piercing blue eyes. Mm-hmm. And so I'm talking to a kid in India, and the kid was great work, and every week, great, but Paul Newman eyes. After like 5 weeks, I said, look, your work is fantastic, but you got to tell me, why won't you give me Paul Newman eyes? And he said, who's Paul Newman? And so I realized, okay, there are two issues here. First of all, culturally, in some of these countries, it's seen as just very poor form to ask your boss anything. You just never ask. And so then I said, okay, so we have to understand that with all this wonderful cultural diversity, which helps the movie, we have to learn a few things. So I learned then how to teach, these crews from all over the world, it's okay to ask. The second thing we learned is, you know what, although the character was not referenced in the movie as such, they don't know who Paul Newman is, which is maybe a shame, but they don't. And so therefore, we have to make sure that our references are much more up to date and therefore much more relatable to the artist. So, and we learned as much from them culturally as they learned from us, because on the movie Bobbleheads I talked about, bobbleheads were invented in India hundreds of years ago. And that bobbling Indian head bobble that's bobbleheads. And so one of the things the studio was very concerned about, as were we, is how much do we make these characters head bobble? But these guys and these people, these men and women, they were such a help in that because it was cultural. It's like as if you go to an Italian family and say, how much you move your hands when you talk. And so they were incredibly helpful. And so it was a great lesson in what I believe true diversity is fun. It's great because you're just hiring people from all over the world. And I believe movies should go to people from all over the world. But then you have to think about their culture to make sure you're speaking to them in a way that they can feel comfortable speaking back to you.
So Larry, with the background that you have, over 200 movies under your belt as a producer or as a studio head, and we're talking about some of the most iconic movies of all time in Platoon, Dirty Dancing, Terminator 2, the Mortal Kombat series, all these things and many, many more. As you start to go with that, you alleviate fear through that place. But fear is the place where it causes you to take a risk. Like what type of risks? How do you get yourself to a risk now? Because most of the time, if you came up with a concept, most of the people right now are going to say yes to Larry.
Only if that were true. A year after Platoon, I ran into the producer, a guy named Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I said, so is it great? Because, he collects the Academy Award. We were at the studio. And he said, you know what it means? He said, better people pass on my stuff. So in other words, whereas before the vice president used to say no to him, now the president says no to him with the studio. But here's the thing. Again, to use a sports analogy. Now let's say you're that fighter who's won 50-0. You think on your 51st fight, the guy in the ring is going to hit you less hard because you have a good track record? You think if you're Tom Brady, the defensive line isn't going to try and sack you just as hard because you're Tom Brady? If anything, they're going to try harder. So the gambles I've taken in the last 2 or 3 years, which can't quite announce now, are the biggest ones I've ever taken in my life. I mean, maybe not quite as big as Platoon because that was my whole career. But no, I shouldn't say that. I'm doing some stuff now that is so out there. So the answer of how do we do that, or how do we push that? I don't find fear to be a motivator for me at all. I find it to be something you have to learn how to control and overcome, but I don't find it to be a motivator. A motivator is all these great ideas and not letting fear stop you. That's how I look at fear. So no, the chances I'm taking now, huge, not a problem at all. And only if people walked in and said, well, it's Larry who's saying it. So, no, people tell me I'm crazy all the time. It doesn't, again, people don't try and not tackle Tom Brady because he's Tom Brady. They try and tackle him harder.
Take us to the conversation early on with Vestron when you want to do Platoon, and what is the actions, set the stage for us and the conversation where you bet your whole career.
Yeah. Well, we talked about that. It wasn't a huge conversation. We were doing a million things. My boss is a wonderfully disruptive entrepreneur, smart guy, and said, he had a phenomenal ability to pick people with what he called fire in their belly. In other words, people who just wanted to succeed. And a lot of the people from Vestron have gone on to great jobs over the years and great positions. And he was very simple. He said, yeah, okay, well, you bet your job. You decide. Let me know. It wasn't anything more than that. There weren't hours and hours of discussions over it. I would go back to the producers and try and whittle down the price a bit, and we'd try and do everything we could do to, we got options on their future movies. We did all kinds of stuff to mitigate it. But it wasn't, it was just, do I want to take that bet? But everything's a bet. Nothing great happens without taking a chance.
The chance that you took in Florida with Mortal Kombat, this one blew my mind too. You had $24 million budget, 24 episodes, $1 million an episode, which to a person that doesn't hasn't played in that realm, they're thinking, oh, $1 million, but that goes really fast, especially with the type of fight scenes, things like that.
So you're talking about when we decided to do a Mortal Kombat live action TV series, which was great. And I think the budget was closer. I don't remember exactly, but it was about $24 million. And the studio wanted to go to New Zealand because it was cheaper. And New Zealand's great. I love traveling. I love going to New Zealand. But I'm a big believer in fight scenes in movies should be authentic. So when you saw something in one of our Mortal Kombat movies that I produced or the TV series, someone really did it. And that means sometimes you fly in someone for one shot because they can do, a spinning triple 720 axe kick better than anyone else, and you fly them out. And New Zealand was simply too far to do that. So I thought, and the studio was great, and they said, okay, you've got 2 weeks. So I went to Florida because Disney World in Florida has great stages there. And I asked everyone, can you just, we'll bring you a year's worth of work if you just cut your fees by 20, I think it was 20% or something. And so just so you understand, a lot of people who work in the entertainment business, the movie business, the stunt business, the acting business, they have a high day rate, but they only work a few days a year. So he said, if you cut your day rate by some percentage, I think it was 20, we'll guarantee you X weeks of work. So you'll make tons more money than you ever made before, but your day rate technically will go down. And people didn't want to do it. And so again, go bigger. I thought, well, if everyone's saying no to me, I'm running out of time. I just held a press conference. And I invited all the press, I invited everybody, and I stood up and I said, I have $24 million to bring to your town, and otherwise I have to go out of the country, which people didn't like. I have to go out of the country unless you'll all do this. Immediately, the town of Orlando gave us money. Disney MGM made a phenomenal deal with us where they said, they let us, we shot at a stage at the MGM studios at Disney World, but people could come and watch. We became an attraction. All the unions and organizations made a deal with us, and we cut it down to what we needed to cut it down to, and everyone said yes. But the going bigger was, well, everyone said no to me. If I had lost, I would have embarrassed myself in the press, and therefore in front of the studio. Producer makes this big plea that goes unnoticed, but it didn't go unnoticed, and we shot it in Orlando.
So Larry, what brought you to the point of the book, A Touch of Madness, where a lot of people that in your position can kind of ride off into the sunset? And I mean, obviously, and when I say ride off into the sunset, it means that you can continue to take risks, you can continue to do it, but you're turning around and you're giving a blueprint. Like when I read the book, like this is not a blueprint for just the movie business. This is a blueprint. I mean, I have every entrepreneurial friend that I have, every one of them. In my men's group, I was talking about it this week, and I said, we need to study this. Every kid, my son is going to read this. My daughter's going to read it. I think every single person should read this. But why is it so important to you when you really don't have to do this part?
Because, as I said, I really think there's a dearth of creative risk-taking today, not just in the movie business, all over the place and all over the world. I think for some reason, and my job isn't to figure out why. I think we just have to always find solutions. People are scared to be their true, deep down, unbridled, most passionate creative self, and I want them to be. And I was sort of whining to my brother about it one night, and he said, why don't you write a book? My brother he's a ghostwriter for entrepreneurs and CEOs and stuff. He didn't ghostwrite the book, I wrote the book, but he suggested I do it and I said, you're right, I should. And in fact, when the book came out a week ago, and we thought, okay, so we're doing A Touch of the Madness, got to do something mad to promote it. So we made a music video. Mm-hmm. If you look up A Touch of the Madness music video, you find it. And the music video is just a very fun music video, but it has the same message. So we're trying to get the message across on a book. I do speaking tours, and now in a music video, we're trying to get the message across. Be your unbridled creative self. You'll be happier, you'll be more successful, the world will be happier you did it. I just think it's an important message to get out, and I think rather than saying, well, I don't have to do it, I'm fortunately in a position where I can do it. And I think it's really important, and I see it all the time, and I especially see it in really young people, and I think, man, to be like 21 years old and say, I'm not gonna take a risk, what's the point? I don't think that's right. I don't think I understand how they feel that way. I don't think that's the optimal way they should feel. And so I thought maybe, just maybe, I could do something to help. So that's why I did it.
It's unbelievable. And you said about the speaking side of it. I mean, for me, a company out there, any company out there, that would have the opportunity, because most of the time it goes back to the ask part. Most people, when they hear of Larry Kasanoff and they know of you, which, I mean, you've impacted almost every single person in my generation and in your generation. You've impacted every single, there's very few people that can say that. But a lot of us would say, like, oh, I would love to have Larry come and speak to my company, bring a touch of the madness to my company, but I don't know if I could get him. And that's the thing. That's the part of it. Right. Now, not every company is going to be able to do it, but it's amazing to me that it would be available, that those things would be available.
Yeah, no, I thank you for saying that, but I think it's the same thing. However you can get to people, you have to. I learned a long time ago, on Terminator 2, that, you know, people consume entertainment in an increasingly varied amount of ways, or they consume any message in an increasingly varied amount of ways. So you have to be in other words, it's like a pie where the pie's getting bigger, but the slices are getting smaller. So you have to be in the pie business. So in other words, we did Mortal Kombat. We're on our, I think, 20th Mortal Kombat production. Movies, TV shows, animation, live tours, music, video games. And so for something like this, we have a book and a music video and a song and speaking. I think any way you can get the message out, if it's a message that's important to you, and this one's important to me, absolutely, that's what you can do. And I think it's also important for me, I'm not saying for other people, you know, a lot of messages that come through are just always very negative. This is just positive. It doesn't matter what your politics are. It doesn't matter who you are. I'm just saying to people, be your most creative self. Let yourself go. That crazy idea, do it, and you'll feel more fulfilled. Because I can't tell you the amount of people, as I said, who I see who say to me, well, you know, I always wanted to start a bakery, but I don't know. Well, why not? And so it's just very positive, and I think it's important, rather than, again, sitting around complaining about there's a lot of negativity in the world. And I thought, well, maybe I can put a teeny bit of positive in the world. And I love making movies, and I have a slate of 20 of them I'm working on, and hopefully we'll never stop doing that. But I just thought this was something else I could do.
How many movies now are you doing a year?
Well, that's a little bit of a hard question to answer, because we're coming off 3 years of a pandemic.
Got it.
Now there's a writer's strike and an actor's strike.
Okay.
So in the last 2 years, we made 3 movies, a documentary, and the book, which is a little less than our normal. We strive for 3 movies a year, but the last few years, because of the, you know, now we can't make movies during the strike. Mm-hmm. So, but during the pandemic, we developed a lot of movies. We can't develop movies now because of the writer's strike, but we have a lot of scripts. Uh-huh. And so we have a lot of movies, think of planes lined up at LAX when there's bad weather. They're just waiting to take off when the weather clears. That's what we're doing.
If you had to explain the writer's strike to my son, who's 12, because the reason why I say this is because most of the people, the general public, when they hear about it, there's confusion. There's the side of like, are you kidding me? Why don't you just shake hands and make up and then let's get movies working back? But you understand it from a completely different area. If you were explaining it to Maddox, who's 12, how would you explain it?
You know, first of all, I'm not involved in any strike negotiations, so I can't speak at all. And everyone has their point of view on it. But what you have to remember is, in all kinds of disputes, each side is 100% convinced they're right. And so whatever they feel, each side feels they're right. I think sometimes the question has to be to take a step back and say, what's the ultimate goal? And what's the ultimate problem? I think I'm incredibly bullish in the movie business. Most people in my world are not. They think it's a disaster. They think I don't at all. I think, as I've said earlier, that all these things have happened before. They'll happen again. There's really only 2 issues in the movie business right now, in my opinion. One is there has been a political correctness that has made it very hard to, again, be very creative and extreme, which I think the audience wants. But I think that's getting better. The second thing is movies cost too much money. And that's it. They should cost a little bit less. Not a ton less, but a little bit less. Because if they cost a little bit less, there'd be more profits. And if there are more profits, everyone would make more money. So, and if you look at the strikes, you read that everyone is very concerned on the striking side about artificial intelligence. Well, you know what makes movies cheaper? Artificial intelligence. So if there were more AI in movies, they'd be cheaper and there'd be more profits. So these situations get very, very, very complex. I think no one really knows what to do because everyone sets out with a good intention. You know, the studios want to make profitable movies for their shareholders and their employees, and the unions want their members to be well, and they're all good intentioned things. But you have to sometimes stop and say, but what's really the problem? And in my opinion, movies should cost a little bit of money. And, you know, when an assembly line came into play years ago, there were people who didn't like that, but it changed the world. And so did cars and airplanes. And, you know, if you were in the horse and buggy business when cars came in, probably wasn't great, but overall it is. And people are scared of AI. It's a long way of saying that I think when people hear AI, they have a visceral fear. And I give a speech that says, AI, there's a lot of opportunity before the machines take over. So I don't know what's going to happen in the long run. That, again, isn't my job. I only know a little bit about the entertainment business, maybe. And so people are scared of it. So it's something they're scared of. But you read that the unions are saying, well, we don't want AI this, and we don't want AI extras. We've been using digital extras in movies for 20 years. That's not new. A lot of these things aren't new. It's just another way of phrasing it, and it's a little bit better. If you go on Google tonight and ask it a question, and then you go on Chatbox GPT and ask it a question, the Chatbox will probably answer a little more specifically and a little better. That's like saying, well, you know, cars one day didn't have air conditioning and power steering, and now they do. It's just better. But that's good for all of us. It's great for the entertainment business. So the first thing is we should embrace AI the same way we embrace digital filmmaking and the motion control camera and moving 3D Steadicam shot. We should embrace AI. And I think if people did that and stopped fearing it for our business, again, I'm not a sociologist. For our business, all these problems will go away.
You talked about 3 gold rushes,
Yeah.
right? What is the opportunity and idea right now that's a touch of the madness moving forward that you see that's not happening that could lead to the next gold rush?
Most of the revenue of the movie business in the last 120 years, as we know it, has come from Japan and South Korea, the United States, and Western Europe. That's 20% of the world by population, 20%. That means 80% of the world, or over 5 billion people, have really not, in a meaningful way, seen our movies or contributed to their economic growth, and vice versa. And you could go to other countries and say the same things too. India is a phenomenal film center, 1.5 billion people, whose movies are rarely seen out of India, only now starting. And you can say the same thing in China. And I think the opportunity is to make world movies for a world audience with a world cast. Because a lot of movies now will be made in one country like the United States, and there'll be a remake in India and a remake in Mandarin. I think it should be one movie. That's why, as I said, we work on a digital network all over the world to try and do that. Almost all the movies I'm doing or developing take place all over the world. I think the opportunity is international movies, which now, because of technology, can be seen. Do you know that 5 of the 10 fastest growing economies over the next 10 years are in Africa? I mean, there are places that we never really thought of, like Indonesia, Sub-Saharan Africa, because there were no theatrical theaters there. It's not just, well, you can distribute now other ways. Everyone has a smartphone. So I think that's the huge opportunity. And I think while we're sitting around worrying about maybe smaller issues, not smaller issues, issues more local, we should think more globally. But I believe that the opportunity to make global movies for a global audience is fantastic. And we're just sitting here looking at an audience of billions of people who are ready to come online and consume our movies in a meaningful way. But it is no longer going to be all of us in Southern California making movies for the world. It's going to be us working with the world to make movies for the world. That's what I think the opportunity is.
How about the fact of taking your adversaries and creating your partners out of them?
That's just a good way to negotiate. That's honestly a really good way to negotiate. And you just, not always, because sometimes they're just bad people. But there are times when you look and you think, you know, I have to look at these people a little differently. And if you look at them a little differently and you think, well, what is their goal? What do they want? And can I give them what they want while I get what I want? And we all get what we want. And that's really just a great way to negotiate, because sometimes you want to win and you want to. I think, you know, I always say, like in movies, don't be right in the room, be right on the screen. Because a lot of people who want to be right in the argument in the room about, do we put in the scene where you know, Kelly rides away on the horse and I told him, but again, you just got to think of the audience. You got to take a step back and think, what are you doing? We're making movies for the audience. What's right for the audience? Nothing else matters. You can't say in a bar for the rest of your life, well, let me tell you what I wanted to do, or it's done. That's what, you know, when people ask me, well, in this movie, why did you do this? Or what would you have done? I never usually even think about that. It's done. It's like asking a Tom Brady, or another Tom Brady reference, you know, well, what would you have done in that game last Sunday? Well, that game's over. So unless you can learn about what to do for next Sunday, you just move on. So I think we often don't say, but what are we really trying to get to here? What's the goal? And ego gets in the way of this all the time. I cannot tell you the amount of movies, rock and roll groups that ego has ruined. It is such an enemy. And if you can just use, you know, my monk friends and get away from that a little bit, you can get to the goal.
What about going to jail twice and then funding on the third?
Oh.
I'm not talking about you going to jail twice, Larry.
Have I forgotten something?
This one blew me away because I think a lot of people would run the first time.
Well, so it's a question of ask. What do you do when you've asked and you've asked and you've asked and you're so tired of asking? Do you ask again? So we were raising money for a movie from South Korea, and an agent friend of ours brought in a Korean agent friend of his, and his Korean agent friend was an agent/priest. And we never quite understood this. Like, how could you, but that's how he was introduced to us. So he brings in an investor, comes to our studio in Santa Monica. We get along great. Guy loves the deal, signs contract, pictures, everyone happy, ship champagne, supposed to fly to Korea that night and wire us the money the next day. Lands on the tarmac in Korea, gets arrested. We see it in the news. It was like, we call the agent and the agent/priest. What the heck? Listen, so sorry, can't have anybody. I got another guy, brings in another guy. The next guy we're a little less warm to, maybe a little more reticent of this whole thing, but he says it's a good deal. So he says, great, signs deal. This time, no champagne. He goes back to Korea, and we're waiting for the next morning. We're clear, but 2 weeks later, he gets arrested. Agent/priest calls for a third time. Now we're like, you got to be kidding me. This is the thing. Do you do it again? What do you do? What if it works? And there's always that time. Okay, we have to spend this amount of time. So he goes, I got one more. It could happen to anybody. He brings in one more investor. And this time, we're really kind of almost rude to the investor because we so don't believe the agent/priest that it turned out the investor was real and thought, wow, they're not very solicitous of me. They must really not need the money. This must be a great deal. Why is there some money the next day? So we got the money because you just thought to yourself, well, when we really thought about it, the amount of time it would take us to go through the third guy was an hour. And if we were right, you know, the investment was several $1 million, it would be worth it, and that's what happened. It's just sometimes, again, it's you're thinking, do I have the energy to do this? Mm-hmm. Well, you better. I mean, why not? It does happen sometimes. And so we do this kind of stuff all the time now where we say, listen, here's what we want, but we try and not waste time. But I put that in the book because sometimes you think, you want to give up. I mean, can you imagine 2 times the guys get arrested? And it's like, and then the third investor comes in and you're like, well, okay.
You talked about the aliens, the guy with the aliens and how he told you to do that. And that's a guy not really believing in his own idea. There was another guy that you talked about in the book that actually believed in his idea, but you didn't know whether he was taking the money and moving it in another place, but he believed in his concept.
Well, so first of all, I'm not sure the alien guy did or didn't believe it. I am pretty sure the aliens, he knew the aliens were not threatening his kids. And you know, sometimes I wonder what happened to those kids. But anyway, no, so this is a question, this is the same thing about the Time of My Life song and Dirty Dancing. Yeah. The question being, you know, just never, ever give up on your idea. So we made a bunch of movies at the first job at Vestron with a guy who was a great low-budget filmmaker, great ideas, kind of horror sci-fi movies, fantastic ideas, but you know, he would always kind of go over budget. So we'd order 3 movies from him, and he'd spend the advances on movies 2 and 3, making movie 1, but we were making a ton of money in the movies, and they were going well, but eventually he just got so in arrears, we had to do something. And he was a great guy, and so we confronted him in a hotel suite at one of the film festivals, and my boss, Austin, was also a great guy, but could be very strong. He was a very intimidating guy if he wanted to be. And we're now confronting this guy, let's call him Irving, in a room at the festival. And Irving is just sitting as calm as can be with his hand draped behind the couch, no problem whatsoever. And at this point, we have a lien in his business and in his house. And my boss, Austin, is saying, Irving, how could you do this to us? We backed you. I mean, you owe us so much money now. And didn't say a word. And then he kicked it up a notch, my boss, and he said, we trusted you, and you've done this, and where did all this money go, and how could you go over budget like this? And, in our point of view, whether he was taking it or spending it, it didn't really matter. It was just, a lot of money, although the movies were still making money. And then the third time, the guy just cool as a cucumber, arm draped over the couch, didn't say a word. And the third time, Austin said, look, we have a lien in your house, we have a lien in your business, we have a lien in your bank accounts, we can take all your money today in 20 minutes. All I have to do is make a phone call. What do you have to say for yourself? And he said, again, arm over the couch, Larry, Austin, I understand how you feel, but before I answer that question, let me show you something. And he's holding in his hand 3 movie poster concepts. On those days, a lot of times, we would greenlight movies based on the concept, the poster. Because we were selling video cassettes as well, and you're selling movie posters. It's very high concept. And he said, I want to show you these 3 new ideas for new movies. So while we were sitting there saying, we could take everything you have, what do you got to say for yourself? His entire bet on his entire life, economically, was new ideas. 3 new ideas. That's a guy who has a touch of the madness, who, like Jimmy and Michael believed in their song, Time of My Life, he believed in his concepts. And you know what we did? We bought all 3 concepts. Because they were great. And, his movies continue to go over budget, but we continued to make a lot of money, just a little less than when they didn't go over budget. But, 80 movies a year, you, in a sense, can't be that picky. But his chutzpah and his belief in the touch of the madness, it was all hanging on those ideas. And the ideas were concepts. And they were so good.
So when you're working with Arnold and with True Lies and with Terminator or Terminator 2, when you do those kind of things, does it then make it easier to the next movie that you do? Or does it work that way in Hollywood?
Again, I'd use any sports analogy. It's the next game is the next game. And you might have learned a little bit. You might have learned how to, it doesn't, like, let's say I use the boxing analogy, you still get hit. You might have learned to deal with the pain a little bit better, but you still get hit.
Yeah.
They're all challenging. Every movie is challenging. Every movie has its own challenges. That notion that you get to a point where you say, oh, this is so easy, doesn't happen, because you're always pushing yourself to do better. Now, again, you might be used to things, and I've seen this before. I know what's going on here. I mean, I can kind of walk onto a movie set and smell in an instant who's doing what, and I can look at a budget in 30 seconds and just look at the cost report and see. So I've gotten, faster at understanding some things. But no, it's the game doesn't get easier because you've been playing it for a while.
Do you have to consciously keep yourself in that mindset of a touch of the madness, or does it get to a point where it becomes your mindset?
It's always been my mindset. I just didn't know how to call it that way. No. I hire people based on it. I cast based on it. I look at cast I've never met before. I look at someone famous, and I think they have a touch of madness in their eyes. I was telling you the story about how I met my Greg Reed, who introduced me to my great agent, Bill Gladstone, who introduced us to our great publisher, Glenn from Ben Bella. I could see in an instant those guys have a touch of the madness. I buy art that way. I take pictures that way. No. I don't. I would have to try and force myself not to do that, which I don't do. No. But I've always been that way. I just didn't know what to call it. Touch of the madness is very, very, very natural to me, and I'll tell you the answer to that question in a better way. I'm at the point now where if I pitch something to somebody and they say, great idea, we love it, it's fantastic, I get a little nervous. But if they say, oh, you're crazy, oh, this is never going to work, I feel the warm embrace of a touch of the madness, like going for a walk on the beach down here and the morning mist surrounds you, and I feel calm and I go off to make the movie.
Then can a person out there develop the touch of the madness without having that fire in their belly? Or is it the person with the fire in their belly that can develop it?
I think they can be, can be concurrent, because part of a touch of the madness is you need to hang on and believe in your idea with this almost mad zeal. But yeah, of course you can develop it. You just have to have the desire. I mean, it's like saying, can someone lose weight? Barring a medical condition that prevents that, yeah, you can lose weight. It's just a question of how important it is to you. I mean, eat less and exercise more. It's just again, medical conditions to the contrary aside, it's just a question of whether it's something that's really important to you. It's if your value systems really wants you to do that. some of this stuff, you know, we talk about all these things and and I love talking about it, and the book is fun, and it's fun to talk. You know, it can be tough sometimes, because sometimes, I mean, very recently I had a situation with some people very close to me were completely opposed to something I was doing. You know, it's still hard. As I said, it's still a challenge. Just like for all those sports analogies we use, it's still a challenge to be in the game. But if you love it and you believe it, maybe you're used to the challenge. You go, okay, I've been here before, but you're going to do it. And I believe you have to work at it. And yes, you can absolutely develop it if you want to. It's just if you want to. We can plant, as my Buddhist friends say, we can plant the seeds. The book plants the seeds, but you have to water them and make them grow.
So you're in a business of delayed gratification, because even with us sitting here, you alluded to a couple of projects that you're working on that you can't even talk about. How do you manage that? Because there was a time where you had a movie that was not a huge budget horror film, that then years later you end up at a midnight showing of it with Quentin Tarantino. Right. And
well, at his theater, he was
okay, at Quentin Tarantino's theater, and you realize, wow, this thing still has legs. Yeah. But that's, I mean, how many years was there between making
30.
them? 30?
Yeah.
How do you manage that part of it when we live in a society that is like, I do it, I want to see the result?
Well, you're talking about a low-budget movie called Blood Diner, which when I greenlit it, the director is this woman named Jackie Kong, who's just got a great touch of the madness, and she's really tough. And I honestly, when she came to pitch the movie years ago at Vestron, someone who worked with me was really in favor of it. I didn't really even understand it. But when we would like the movie, we would even from our own department, our own marketing department, order a poster to see what it looked like. What do the marketing materials look like? And the poster was beautiful. It was this beautiful, like kind of sunset shot of an Art Deco old diner that said Blood Diner. First they greet you, then they eat you. And I thought, that's genius. And I thought to myself, I'm going to green this like this. And one day I'm going to be glad I did because of that. I don't know why, but I am. So we greenlit the movie. I didn't, honestly, I don't really get it. But it did really well on video and, you know, kind of played as a cult movie for a little while. And I lost track of it. But then I discovered that it had been playing as a cult movie for years. And I got invited, I think 5 years, right before the pandemic, to go to a midnight show when it was playing at a theater in Beverly Hills. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. This movie's still playing? And I kind of went with some friends and almost like, not seriously, but almost like in a trench coat with like dark glasses. It was sold out. And honestly, I still don't get it. But who cares what I get? Somewhere there's an audience that is still going at midnight shows around the country to see Blood Diner. That's fantastic. I didn't find it delayed gratification because the movie was made very quickly and became profitable very quickly. But I found it incredible gratification. Isn't that wonderful that, as the Buddhists would say, a seed we planted a while ago has now sprung into this midnight show tree that people are still enjoying? You can't believe it. You think years later, this movie? No way. That's great. I just find that so happy and so fun that who knew? You know, it's like, let's say you run into someone you knew in high school and now all of a sudden they're, I don't know, ambassador to the United Nations. You're like, oh, that's fantastic. That was great.
Larry, I started the podcast because of my two kids. I talked about them earlier, Maddox and McKenna. Maddox is 12 and McKenna is 14. So the reason why I started it is because I wanted to take iconic people and I wanted to show them that they shouldn't worship idols. I didn't ever, if they saw a pop star, I wanted them to meet the pop star, have dinner with them, lunch with them. I would find their agent, find their mom, whoever it was, and I would introduce my kids to that pop star or to that movie star or whatever it was.
That's great.
And through this process, I wanted my kids to realize that they were just iconic people that had great work ethic and phenomenal attitudes. I mean, you've showed that today. So Maddox is he's in the sports side of it, marches to a beat of his own drum. He's got half his head shaved, shaved on the other side, and then mohawk, kind of mohawk dreads, wears them in a ponytail, looks like a Viking, but he's 12. My daughter is an actress. She's actually at a production right now of Little Mermaid.
Oh, that's great.
And so she's in that world, the creative side. I took those two and I wanted to just surround them with, again, the most iconic people in the world.
Oh, good for you.
Like yourself. So what advice would you have for Maddox and McKenna? And if you could use both their names, it would be awesome.
Well, first of all, I love the names Maddox and McKenna. They're great names. But they have a great dad, and I'm sure your wife's great too. So therefore, they're probably in great shape. And since they're already doing and you're giving them the opportunity to do the advice I would give people, which is to start asking people to start having a touch of the madness now, because especially in high school and junior high school, and especially now with cyberbullying and stuff, there's where it's really hard on kids to maintain their individuality. Again, that current of the river, which we all face, it's really strong at their age. I've had, relatives of my own who, at 15, they're going to be a painter in Paris, and at 16, they're going to be do something much more normal. And if they want to do that, that's great. But I would encourage them, but you're already doing that, to just maintain their individuality. And the other thing I would encourage is, I think today, it sounds like you don't do this, but I think today a lot of kids are a little too coddled. And they have to get out there a little bit on your own and learn stuff a little bit on your own, because part of the, if your parents are doing everything for you, you're not going to turn around and call up the Pope when you're 25, because you've never had to do anything for yourself. So maintaining your individuality, which I would call starting a touch of the madness, but also just, going out there and trying. And if you fall down, you'll get up and scrape yourself up. Those are the two things that I would say. But who the hell am I to talk about kids?
Well, let me ask you this. And my daughter being, wanting to go down that line as far as the performance side, things like that, but she's also she also writes and she also does those kind of things. From your standpoint, like, not from a child aspect, but just from a young lady getting in the business, what would that advice be to McKenna?
So to McKenna, I would say the biggest mistake young actors make is they think, how can I be everything to everybody? That's how I'll get in quickly. So I better be funny, and I better be a good dancer, and I better be tough, and I better be good in horror movies. No. The best thing to do is to figure out your sweet spot. Ask yourself 3 questions. What am I great at? What do I love? And what can I sell myself as? And where those, and I would tell that to anybody, and where those 3 intersect, that's your sweet spot. So I would advise McKenna to have her sights set on 5 years from now, or, she's young, but maybe 7 years from now, what area of the movies, what genre is she going to stand out in, and play to that genre. Because you can whittle down the business enough that you can meet everyone in that genre, you can figure out that genre, you can be an expert in that genre, and in reality, what happens is people call people like me, and we call each other, and right now we can't talk to agents, but when you can, and you say, listen, I need a so-and-so. So I might call someone and say, I need a martial artist who can act for my next movie, or I need someone really funny for this movie. That's how people talk. And if they say, oh, well, I know someone who can do everything, you're like, yeah, but if we were talking about dinner tonight, people say, let's go for Italian food, let's go for sushi. You very rarely hear people say, well, let's go to a restaurant that has just a little bit of everything. You forget about it. It's not specific enough. So if you focus on one genre, you're much more likely to succeed in that genre. And then once you get famous, you can cross over and do anything you want.
I want to compliment you because most of the time, Larry, a person writes a book about a concept, and most of it is theory. We were talking about this earlier, and I was saying the difference between you, I believe, becoming one of the greatest speakers in this world and in the industry is because you're not speaking from any theory. And that's why, for me, A Touch of the Madness, like, in reading it and experiencing it, like, I have implemented it at least 5 to 7 times within a day of reading the chapter.
That's great. That's very gratifying. And
what I want to compliment you in it, because I was dropping my son off, and as I'm dropping him off for 6th grade camp, first time he's ever going away, he's 12 years old, he's away right now, and I'm, as a dad, I'm like, I got to go get my boy.
He's having a great time. Don't worry.
Yeah, he is. He doesn't want to be with his pop right now, but I tapped into that touch of the madness when he got out of the car, because I was like, son, like, getting a little bit of trouble. You know what I'm saying? Like, and he was like, Dad, I'm about to take my cell phone with me. And I was like, are you allowed to? He said, no. And I was like, all right, cool. Hide it then. And that's where I want to compliment you, because again, most books that you'll read are theory, or they'll tell you about these steps, but this truly, and spending this time with you today, in reading it, I felt like I was sitting with you.
Oh, good.
I heard your voice. I heard your voice. And then in spending time with you, it's unbelievably congruent. And that message, and it not just be a message, like you said, for the movie industry or it's a message for every single person that I come in contact with, which is so diverse, that if they added a touch of the madness to them, there's no way that things wouldn't improve for them.
Well, thank you for saying that, and that's what I think too. Yeah, the book is not theoretical. There are no charts and graphs. It's not theoretical. It's not a lecture in business. It just uses fun stories from my world to explain how you can improve yours, and that's it. You can read the whole book in 2.5 hours.
Did you mean to like throw like haymaker blows within the first paragraph or two? Because most people warm you up in a book, and then they start dropping things.
No, that's just the way I talk. I as I said, I wrote the book because I wanted to encourage people to be their truest creative selves. And I realized these are stories that I tend to tell my staff probably too much. And I thought, no, that's just the way I talk. I didn't plot it out terribly carefully. I thought, what would I tell people in order to do this? As my brother said, well, then help people, tell them this. And I thought, here's what I tell people. And this is what I tell people. This is exactly what I tell people all the time. The same way I tell McKenna, this is what you got to do. And there's no difference whether I'm talking to McKenna or a movie star or a product manager at Procter & Gamble. It's all the same stuff because it's all human nature.
Larry, it's been an absolute pleasure. And what I want to tell you that I'm going to force you to be my friend for the rest of your life.
Deal, Cal.
So
great.
And what I would
by the way, I got to tell you something. I love what you said to Maddox when he left. So I have nieces and nephews, and when they used to go to summer camp, I used to conspire with them in this incredibly complex way how to sneak food in. Not tell my brother, because my brother is a little bit more play by the rules. And we did these incredible things, like we get huge things of shampoo and then put in a fake inside, so there's just a little bit of shampoo between the inside and the outside one, but in the middle of it, put like candy and stuff. And we do it because I was trying to teach them the same thing too. Don't play by the rules.
Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I would love to have you on the podcast again.
Sure, my pleasure.
And what would be great is as you go along and as these risks that you're taking now that you said that you can't talk about, it's going to be fun to be able to come back and talk about.
I hope so.
And talk about that touch of the madness.
They're really great. You should hear the next. I mean, I can't. I'm not being. It's just not ready, but it's really unusual.
Well, I want to tell you, it means the world to me. Anyone out there that's listening and watching, you honestly, grab the book for yourself, for your wife, for your kids. I'm actually paying my daughter. I'm paying her to read it.
You got to pay her to read the book?
Well, because at 14 years old, anything that your dad tells you to do is not it.
Yeah,
so I said, look, I want you to.
What are her favorite movies?
She's a Stand By Me. She's an eclectic girl. She's Stand By Me, Stranger Things big. She was big into that. She loves the Goonies. Only 14 years old, but I walk in and I'm watching movies that I grew up with.
Wow.
And she is just an eclectic, the personality, the wit. I mean, she does not ease up on me at all. I say to her every day.
Sounds great.
She's phenomenal. I say to her, you're the greatest. In the morning, and she says, "I know," and I said, "This is when we get out of the car.
I like
this is
already.
our routine, Larry. Yeah. You're the greatest. I know. I love you, baby. Who wouldn't?" Slams the door and walks off. So
she'll be an actress.
It's her personality.
Yeah,
so
she's got it.
It's amazing. So I want to thank you again.
My pleasure. I had a great time.
How can people get in touch with you? I know that the speaking side. I want to shout this from the hilltops because. If you're listening and you're watching, if you own a company, if you work in a company, there is an opportunity to have Larry Kasanoff, the one and only, as a speaker in your company and at your convention. That is an opportunity, but you got to ask. How can they ask?
Go to atouchofthemadness.com, or they can reach me at either on Instagram or LinkedIn at Larry Kasanoff.
Okay. And what I would suggest is every company out there, grab the book for your whole entire company. And I guarantee you, once you do, you will be lining up down the street to be able to have Larry come and speak with you. It's been my absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Kelly. I had a great time.
And Larry, you're officially off the hot seat.
All right. Thanks, man. That was really good.